hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 80 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday evening here with me. If you're checking out episode 80 on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and also comment if you should see fit. If you're checking out episode 80 on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. If you enjoy the content, click like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. So you see, I'm once again decked out in my Ali gear. I've got the Superman versus Muhammad Ali collector's cap, and I have the "If you even dream of beating me, you better wake up and apologize" t-shirt. A moment in pop culture history, which was spun by Quentin Tarantino into a memorable exchange in the film Reservoir Dogs between Michael Madsen, Mr. Blonde, Harvey Keitel, Mr. White. Today is another famous, infamous, iconic on this day. On this day, 1967, February 6th, at the Houston Astrodome, the next to last fight for Prime Ali, still probably the greatest heavyweight who ever lived. The Ali from 1964 to 67. Size is one thing, you start debating the Klitschko brothers and Fury, and they're so much bigger than him, they would outweigh him by 30 pounds, or in the case of Fury, like 80 pounds. I would argue that even with that, if there was a way to have Vegas odds makers lay down odds, I believe that the 1966 Ali would be the betting favorite against any fighter who ever lived of any weight class. Doesn't mean he would win. It means that in people's estimation, because he beat some really big dudes. I mean, how confident would we be the Klitschko brothers or Tyson Fury beating 1973-74 George Foreman? Not that confident. I think that George Foreman of 73 would be the betting favorite against Tyson Fury. The expectation is he would just walk him down. Fury wouldn't be able to manhandle George. George would be shoving him all over the ring, but that's beside the point. The idea is that this is a special night for a positive reason, being positive negative. This was one of the last times that Prime Ali got to show his stuff in the ring. And it's a negative on this day because it is probably the only fight in his career where he fought angry. And he was not a guy, for all the pre-fight chatter, the nonsense between him and Joe Frazier, the back and forth, the kind of really uncomfortable moments that he had with other fighters like Floyd Patterson, who he ended up being friends with after their careers. But Ernie Terrell was a very strong fighter, a huge man, 6'6", 240 plus, not a big puncher. He was a huge man. And in this instance, for the first of what would be two times, a very bizarre circumstance where Ali had been the lineal, meaning combined champion, and he no longer was, but not because he lost, but because a governing body, one of the alphabet soups, decided to pull the title. So Ali may have fought Ernie Terrell anyway, because Terrell had beaten a lot of the guys that they had fought. They had a lot of common opponents, and in the future, there were certain guys that one or the other fought that the other would then fight. But specifically, when Ali beat Sonny Liston in 64, he gave Liston a return match, which normally would be considered standard practice, but for whatever reason, it may have just been because the young Cassius Clay then became Muhammad Ali. The WBA decided that they didn't like the fact that Liston was getting a return match, and they just took the title away. Hey, no problem. They didn't beat you in the ring, but we're taking your title. So Ernie Terrell, they didn't even have an elimination tournament or anything, which is what they did later in the decade. Ernie Terrell, they just said, okay, we're going to have Ernie Terrell fight Eddie Macon, who was a tough fighter, top contender. And Ernie Terrell beat Eddie Macon, and so thus he was the WBA World Heavyweight Champion. Leading to, a few years later, Terrell defended the title against George Chuvalo, who Ali fought twice. And leading to this showdown between the two world heavyweight champions. And most people figured that Ali was going to win. They said, well, I mean, Ernie's tough. He's very strategic. He's got good movement in the ring for a big guy. He can take a hell of a shot. He's he's good defender, but he really doesn't punch very hard, and he can't really outbox Ali. We don't see how he's going to win this fight. So it was not really expected to be that competitive of a contest. Now, because it's an insular sport, boxing, everybody knows everybody. And people are sometimes surprised, for example, to find out that Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson knew each other for way longer than people thought. Like, they didn't meet for the first time when they were fighting each other. They knew each other going back in the day to when Tyson was still training at Catskill. And so in this instance, Ali and Terrell knew each other for quite some time. Again, they didn't necessarily come up at the exact same moment in history, but Terrell knew Ali, Ali knew Terrell, and they had always been cordial. And sometimes you're just going to have people you don't get along with, and there's static and there's contentiousness. And other times there isn't. So when this fight was announced, Ernie Terrell, for reasons unknown, insisted on calling Ali by his birth name, Clay. Now, history shows that Ali did not always get angry when people called him Clay, because people continued to call him Cassius even after he changed his name. Some in the media, like Howard Cosell, immediately began to call him Muhammad. He didn't always get angry, but there was something in this instance about the way that Terrell was calling him Clay, and he insisted on calling him Clay. It really got under his skin. And he was a guy who was famous for the psychological warfare, Ali that is, and getting under the skin of his opponents. But in this case, Terrell, if he was trying psychological warfare, it worked, but it didn't work in the way that he really would have wanted. Like, he wasn't trying to get humiliated in the ring. He says, I'm going to fuck with this guy so he beats the shit. No. He thought maybe he could get a psychological edge, or maybe he was just being a troll and said, you know what? I met you. We were friends years ago. We didn't know we were going to end up fighting. And you told me your name was Clay, so I'm just calling you. That's what you told me. So this went back and forth. And there were moments, if you look at, and this is available on YouTube, there are moments where Ali is almost pleading with Terrell. Just say my name, man. Come on. He's almost acting a little bit hurt, like a wounded kid, wondering why somebody is picking on him. He wasn't, they were going to fight. They were both going to try to take each other's heads off. Don't get me wrong. But it's like, to him, this is a level of respect. It's the bare minimum. And when Ernie just kept calling him Clay, Ali was really angry. And it's, again, one of the rare times in pre-fight where he's really pissed off. And he went out that night. He had a fight plan, a normal, cautious game plan. Ali was not a risk taker. Nobody wants to get humiliated. Nobody wants to get their head taken off or knocked unconscious or anything like that. You know, you could say that he kind of learned a lesson in the Cooper fight when he was admittedly a lot smaller and younger at 21. He wasn't quite ready to, like, if the 1963 Ali had fought Liston, he probably would have lost. He was a little lighter, but that Ali, or Cassius Clay at the time, he took some unnecessary risks. It's one thing to kind of clown and try to embarrass your opponent in the way that, like, Prince Nassim did in later years, you know, during his kind of glory period there. But it's another thing to just be reckless. And Ali, for all of the clowning in the ring during fights, he wasn't doing it to get blasted. He was doing it to make his opponents wonder, did I really catch this guy? I thought I hit him square. He's laughing at me. He's moving around the ring. His footwork is pop, 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 pop. Totally different. So his normally cautious game plan, he threw out the window. And when they got out there, and this was Ali's second fight in a row, he had fought Cleveland Williams famously November 14, 1966. That is considered the best representation of Ali's skills that anyone ever saw. Williams was well past it. He was not the fighter that he had been. Ernie Terrell had defeated him as well. They actually split two fights, but Ernie had won the most recent fight that he had with Cleveland Williams, which was before Ali fighting Williams. But in that fight, it was 3 rounds. It should have been 2 rounds. And Ali showed incredible movement in the ring, incredible speed with his feet, with his hands, with his head, being able to move out of the way of punches. It was as if he had some kind of radar going at that point in his career, where he knew where the punch was going before the guy threw it. It was crazy. So we got into the ring for the Williams fight. for the Ernie Terrell fight. In his mind, he knew I'm going to beat this guy. And when you talk about common opponents, one common opponent that I have to mention in particular is Bob Foster, who was a light heavyweight champion and one of the greatest light heavyweights who ever lived. There are people right now, when asked, who is the greatest light heavyweight ever? Bob Foster is going to be named as much as Mike Spinks. He's going to be named as much as, Evander was more of a cruiser. But Bob Foster was a deadly light heavyweight. But to show that in boxing, the weight classes can matter, that it's not just a matter of who punches harder or who's the best fighter. Because Bob Foster had the capacity to knock people unconscious at light heavy. He almost killed Mike Quarry, Jerry Quarry's younger brother. Almost killed him. He hit him with a shot that was so perfect, Quarry was unconscious for at least a half hour. They could not rouse him. It was scary. And Foster won the title by beating Dick Tiger, who was one of the toughest SOBs to ever set foot in a prize ring. Man, Dick Tiger was tough. And Foster landed a left hook that almost took his head off. Like just a crushing blow. But at heavyweight, Bob Foster later in 72 fought Ali, landed some big shots, and he actually opened a cut. He cut Ali. Nobody ever cut. It's the only time in all the professional fights that Ali had, and even going back to the amateurs, the only time he was cut. Bob Foster. In a fight, it was at Lake Tahoe in Vegas, a very weird setting. It was like a lounge area that you normally would have singers or comedians, and they had a professional boxing match with Ali and Foster, who was a light heavyweight champ at the time. But Foster landed some of the same, howitzer level punches on Ali that he landed on Mike Quarry and Dick Tiger, and Ali just was moving right through him, just walking him down. 7 knockdowns, just boom. Foster gets up, lands a few shots, boom, down he goes. Terrell beat Bob Foster, same thing. Foster landed big shots, he couldn't move him. Foster fought Joe Frazier for the heavyweight title. Landed some good shots in the first round. Second round, Joe's like, all right, you know what? I had enough of this tall, skinny kid. Boom. Fight's over. So the actual fight night of Ali versus Terrell is not really a very entertaining fight. It's so one-sided. And, people at the time said there was almost a bit of cruelty to what Ali was doing and what he did that night. He was so pissed off. He wasn't just trying to win. There are moments in that fight, particularly in the first half, where it looks like he can end the fight. That he has Terrell stumbling and staggering around the ring, trying desperately to cover up. And his face was all, puffed up from the bruising and the hematomas from getting hit so much. But it's like he kept pulling back. He didn't want to end the fight. And he was accused of doing this against Floyd Patterson in 65. I've seen that fight. I don't agree with that. In this fight, you can at least make the argument that he carried, that would be the phrase, he carried him, that he carried Terrell for 15 rounds, that he wasn't content to try to end the fight early, maybe, land a couple of big shots and end it. Because again, Ali was not that kind of fighter. Probably the biggest single punch that he landed in the 60s, you want to say, what's the hardest shot he landed? It was in the 65 fight with Carl Mildenberger. I think it was late 65. And Mildenberger was really tough. He was really tough. He was sturdy. He was kind of like George Chuvalo mixed with Oscar Bonavena in terms of his toughness. There was a moment in the fight, Ali knocked him down, I think, 3 times in that fight, where Mildenberger came somewhat charging in, and as he came forward, Ali did something he normally didn't do, which is he literally wound up and threw a right-hand lead. That was not his way, because normally you could have something coming in return that you won't be able to get out of the way of if you overcommit. But in this case, Mildenberger came in and Ali fully committed to the shot. And he landed a punch on Mildenberger that was so perfect that not only did Mildenberger go down, but the force of the blow actually made him somersault backwards. And then as he started to get up, he kind of hopped as if his body was still reverberating from getting hit so hard. But he wasn't known as a huge puncher. So if there's ever an idea, maybe I get this guy out in the first couple of rounds, it was very unlikely. And also because Ernie was taller than him. Ernie was about 6'6". And let's face it, it's easier to punch somebody when you're punching down as opposed to punching up. Ali was clever, so rather than throw his usual downward darts, he threw more hooks and more straight right-hand leads. And the fight was one-sided and, I hate to use the word massacre, but in 15 rounds, 2 of the judges had it as unanimous, not a unanimous decision. that the champ, in this case Ali, won all 15 rounds. And on the other card, one judge, it might have been the ref, had Ernie winning a single round. And so when the fight was over, there were no mea culpas from Ernie Terrell. He just, he got beat up. He didn't really say very much. And even in later years, he never really apologized. He just said, you know what? I went out there, I tried to win the fight. And then they said, have you seen him again? Did you see each other again? And he indicated that he had, and there were no dirty words or bad words. But the two guys never really like reconnected in a kind of heartwarming way where one guy apologized. It didn't happen. Whereas Floyd Patterson, when Ali was going through the shit in the late 60s, Floyd had his back, despite the fact that they had had a lot of bad words before the fight in 65. Floyd acted as if he didn't like him, and I don't like this guy. He doesn't represent America. Hey, fuck you. What the hell you mean? Like that kind of thing. But then they reconciled. And even Ali and Frazier, for all of the brutality that went on between them in those three fights, all the angry barbs that went back and forth, ultimately, they had a deep respect for one another, Ali and Frazier. Ali and Terrell, they never really connected after that. And Terrell continued to fight. He had a really solid career. He is in the World Boxing Hall of Fame. It's not as prestigious as the International Boxing Hall of Fame. But he was considered a top tier fighter of the 60s, not on the level of a Sonny Liston, or certainly not on the level of the guys from the 70s, Frazier Norton and George Foreman. Not even close. Like, he would have had a real tough time beating any of those guys if, near their prime. But he was somebody he was tough. He beat Zora Foley, who was the guy that Ali would fight next in the last fight that he would have before his exile period. And as I say, he beat Chuvalo, he beat Eddie Macon, and he actually fought Tony Hunsaker. I believe he may have fought Hunsaker. No, he fought Hunsaker once. Tony Hunsaker was actually the guy young Cassius Clay fought in his first fight as a professional after winning the 1960 Olympic gold medal in the light heavyweight class, the future Muhammad Ali, that is. And he was still wearing his USA trunks, which I think is amazing that they couldn't even get him trunks like professional trunks. He was just wearing his amateur trunks in the ring when he fought Tony Hunsaker. And, he defeated Hunsaker pretty easily. But when you think about, this sort of strange concept of some fighters fighting angry versus not, and you look at other fights in Ali's career, when he fought Quarry, not the first fight, second fight, and because the first fight, they had to stop it on cuts. The second fight, Ali was just pounding the crap out of Jerry, and he didn't want to, and he waved the ref to come over, and the ref basically was saying, keep fighting, don't fuck around here. And then finally the ref stopped the fight. And you could see that Ali didn't want to punish the guy. He's out there to do a job. He doesn't want him to suffer needlessly. And the same thing, Buster Mathis, another Ali fight where he said, I want to embarrass, I like Buster. What am I going to do? They put me in the ring with him. And he said something like, hey, his family's there, I don't want to humiliate the guy. So that was a fight where Ali backpedaled. Sometimes you can carry a guy and it's sort of like you're coasting. He did it with Al Blue Lewis in a fight in Ireland because Blue had been one of his training partners. He didn't want to embarrass the guy. And then famously with Ron Lyle, it's really one of Ali's better performances of the 70s because Lyle nearly knocked out George Foreman when Foreman was very close to his prime. And Lyle was tough. And that was a fight where Ali was seemingly down in the 11th round and landed really, again, a great single shot. Maybe his best single shot in the 70s. He landed an overhand right. And Lyle just basically stumbled around the ring for at least 30 seconds. And even in the heat of the moment, Ali was champ. Tough fighter in front of him. You can't take any chances. When he realized and saw that Lyle couldn't defend himself, he's screaming at the ref, get in here, get in here, get in here. And then finally the ref did stop the fight and it was controversial, but he, generally speaking, did not fight angry. He didn't go out there, although as Mike Tyson says, we're in the hurt business. This is a hurt business. He didn't want to hurt people. He wanted to end the fight as gently and delicately as possible. It's so absurd, right? It's such a weird twist. It doesn't really make sense because you're in a business to separate a person from their senses. Two open cuts. It's a brutal sport. But in most cases, he didn't fight that way. He wanted to do the bare minimum to end the fight, even against Foreman and Zaire. if you look at the end of the fight, which, there's actually controversy. It doesn't really matter now. It's 50 years later. But, I always said, and many people, and George Foreman also said, George is up at the count of 8, and that would be Zach Clayton, is waving the fight over. And a lot of people said at the time it was a short count, but then there were others that said, yeah, but the fight was over. What was George going to do? And just before George, in that fight, staggered and stumbled to the ground, Ali landed a good right, a very strong overhand right, and George kind of, in slow motion, almost stumbled around the ring and fell. And you see Ali was cocking his arm. If George had been able to steady himself, because we see guys, Floyd Mayweather famously, when he got hit by Shane Mosley, you sometimes will stagger, but you won't fall. George staggered, and at one point it looked like he was going to be able to stay upright, and Ali is cocking his fist, and theoretically he could have thrown another shot as George seemed to be falling. But you see him hold up. And after the fight, he was asked, the fight could have continued. They could have let George continue. Why did you hold your punch there? You weren't breaking any rules. And Ali said he had enough. He had enough. And as they say, Mike Tyson was famous for fighting angry. That Tyson always was a coiled wellspring of rage. And unfortunately, in his later career in the Holyfield, especially the second fight, he was convinced he was getting fouled, and he started biting Evander and all of that. But Jack Dempsey, another old-time legend, great. You look at pictures of Jack Dempsey fighting, he looks like he is seething with rage. His face is screwed up with anger as he's delivering punches. Similarly, Roberto Duran is a guy. You look at pictures of some of Duran's fights, he's snarling in there. Everybody has a different process. Ali in the Ernie Terrell fight is the only fight where you look at a lot of pictures of him. He's not just grimacing from effort. He looks like he's mad. He looks like, fuck this guy. I want to hurt this guy. The Stallone movie Over the Top, when they talk to the bad guy, Bull Hurley, I want to hurt him, cripple him. He looked like he wanted to really hurt Ernie Terrell. And he did. But Terrell's career continued. He never reached the heights. They had an elimination, like a round robin eliminator tournament when Ali was kind of thrown out of the sport there to figure out who was going to be the next heavyweight champion. And it was kind of an upset. Ernie Terrell lost to a guy by a kind of disputed decision named Thad Spencer. And he was never really a serious contender again after that. He carried on for a while, but he retired in 73. And, he could say he was a WBA World Heavyweight Champion. And, he made 2 successful title defenses. He just, he kind of ran into a buzzsaw. He ran into a buzzsaw with Ali. And so after that fight was over, and he went on, went on with Howard Cosell, who was his closest ally in the press. It wasn't really called the media in 67. It was just called the press. But Cosell was disappointed. He was upset because he didn't think there was any reason for him to have behaved like that in the ring and carried. He was convinced, Muhammad, you could have ended this fight sooner. It's not okay what you did. Now, Ali was not in a mood to apologize. He didn't. He said, going out there to win the fight. I don't agree with you. He's a big dude. He take care of himself. He's tough. You saw I hit him with a lot of shots. Man didn't go down. He stood there. He stood up against me. Never called him Ali, though. And that famous moment, the iconic, kind of really sad, because they're both gone now. Ernie Terrell is gone. Ali's been gone 6.5 years. No, 7.5 years. And the iconic moment from the fight, and I understand it took me a while to get to this, but the moment from the fight in the 8th round, where it's just one-sided, and Ali is doing everything he wants to Ernie in this fight. And they, hit the thing where there's 10 seconds left, and Ali squares Ernie up a couple more times, and then he stops punching before the bell and screams, "What's my name? What's my name? What's my name?" And that question still echoes and still reverberates because we've seen it. There's not always anger and viciousness and nastiness in the minds of people. When Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was Lou Alcindor and changed his name, Not everybody called him Kareem Abdul-Jabbar right away. It doesn't mean that there was acrimony or rage, but it's when somebody changes their name, respect it. That's all. Just respect it. And you can ask for respect coming back. Ernie could have said, okay, you did introduce yourself to me as Cassius. I thought we were friends. I know we were probably going to have to fight, but you are Muhammad Ali. How about you don't call me an Uncle Tom or whatever? You know what I mean? So you can do that. You can have that back and forth. It doesn't just have to be one way. But I remember the basketball player, Chris Jackson, in the 90s, I believe it was, he converted to Islam, and his name is Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. And to my knowledge and my memory, it took a long time before he wasn't just called Chris Jackson. What's my name? So Prime Ali only had one more fight, sadly, in the following month, actually. And he was having fights quickly because they weren't very taxing. He was able to get himself together and fight 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever it might be. And he fought Zora Foley in March of 1967 at Madison Square Garden. Ali was now 25. And Zora Foley was, as I said, it was somebody who was a real crafty, tough fighter. Kind of undersized for a heavyweight, but tough as nails, could take a big shot, and he was fast, and he could hit with both hands. He really couldn't lay a glove on Ali. He just kind of moved around the ring, and he landed some real big shots and ended up winning the fight by a 7th round KO. There were a couple of knockdowns, and the outcome was never in doubt. And that was the final curtain. That was the final curtain for the 1964 to 67 iteration of Ali, who, as I say, generally regarded as the finest heavyweight who ever lived. Then his issues with the United States military-industrial complex came to the forefront, and that is a whole other podcast. The fact that he was exiled. And for the second time, the first time was total absurdity that the WBA took his title because he wanted to make a defense against the former champ. They just didn't like him. They didn't like that he changed his name. His titles were stripped because of the situation with the Vietnam War. He didn't fight for another 3.5 years. And the whole idea of what's my name would take on a greater importance historically, because part of his arguments against the military-industrial complex and, being used, just in brief, for purposes of propaganda to support, the United States involvement in Vietnam, is that he would claim conscientious objector status. I don't really know that that's, whether or not that was actually the reason. That was the reason that they argued in court, that as a Muslim minister, he couldn't take part in a war in any capacity, whether actually fighting or whether as a tool for propaganda, which was what he was going to be used for. He just, in good conscience, couldn't do it. And he said, hey, I accept the consequences. Whatever's going to happen here is going to happen here. And then, long story short, he's out of the sport for 3.5 years, comes back, and he has arguably his greatest glory in the 70s because he's not as good, because his skills were still formidable, but they were not untouchable, as he was for that stretch, 1964 to 67. He made 9 title defenses, including his first defense against the former champion, Sonny Liston. That's the Phantom Punch fight. It's been argued that he did not lose a single round in those 9 fights. The only fighter who maybe you could say took a round or two, Mildenberger. But even Joe Louis, who also had an up and down relationship with Ali, didn't like the fact that he beat Liston in the first fight because Joe supposedly had a huge bet on Sonny. He thought Ali listen, everybody thought he was entertaining when he was a kid. He's funny. I like him. Sugar Ray Robinson, another guy, the kid is a fucking riot. I like hanging out with him. He's crazy, but he's funny. But Joe Louis, who was doing the commentary of the Mildenberger fight with Cosell, when the fight was coming to a conclusion, Joe, how do you have it scored? And he was afraid. Louis was almost like, how do I have it scored? I think the champs won every round. So the Foley fight was his last. And then the exile period, and then the great achievements of the 70s, which, as I say, the great achievements that Ali would have in the 70s are beyond the scope of this particular On This Day episode. But I wanted to point out something, a name you wouldn't expect me to say in this particular podcast, LeBron James. When Ali passed June 3rd into June 4th of 2016, a shit ton of people, and many of you probably remember this, there were people from all walks of life who knew him, loved him, had experiences with him. You know, he probably holds an unofficial record for having been friends with the most number of United States presidents, which is crazy when you think about it. Everyone except Nixon. He was friendly with Ford. He was friendly with Carter. He was friendly with Reagan. He was friendly with Barack and Donald. And Bill Clinton spoke at his funeral, and Bill Clinton was one of the people who did the eulogy. That is insane. And George W. Bush was the person who pushed in the mid-2000s, early in his second term, to give Ali the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It was for reasons like that, for his stance during that terrible time, the turbulent, cliche, but fucking true as fuck, during that time. When Ali passed, and LeBron James, as a huge star, a person of color, was asked for his thoughts. And he didn't say anything that bad, but he didn't know the history. He said a couple of things which had reporters scratching their head, because even the LeBron of that era was usually very canny and very on top of history and certain events. And there were areas of Ali's life which he clearly didn't know, and he was embarrassed. No reporters embarrassed him. That's not what I'm saying. But he was embarrassed because he did an interview and somebody said, hey, didn't you could have brought up this, you could have brought up that. And he's like, fuck. He felt bad. So rather than do nothing, again, you have LeBron James connections, LeBron James money, you can make things happen. LeBron was part of a production team that put together a very highly acclaimed documentary that aired on HBO, and it was nominated for a lot of awards. It was directed by Antoine Fuqua, fantastic filmmaker. He did Training Day, among others. Really top-level filmmaker. But LeBron James and his producing partner, Maverick Carter, got the money together and made this film called What's My Name, a two-part documentary. A lot of it told by Ali in his own words as his story progressed. But the main component of the movie is this concept of say my name. Or in the case of the Ali Terrell fight, what's my name? Just show me a little bit of respect. What's my name? And I remember when that documentary came out, I believe it was released in two parts. It played at the Tribeca Film Festival, again, to a lot of acclaim. There's so much material out there on Ali. There's so much. There's the Ken Burns crazy 8-hour documentary. There are other documentaries. There's the Will Smith, the Michael Mann film, Michael Mann, who just celebrated his, I believe, 82nd birthday or 83rd. There's so much information out there. But this particular documentary, at the time, people said, this is really good. Yes, there's certain life events, as it's been said about Ali. You could make documentaries about years of his life, 1 year. There's so much shit that happened to this guy and around this guy. But that documentary made an impression. It's exceedingly well done. And for what it's worth, it is in the library of, what used to be HBO Max, now Max. It's in the documentary folder. If you're interested in checking it out, it's just called Muhammad Ali, What's My Name? Well worth seeing to get a kind of greater understanding of all of the forces at work with this guy. The rah-rah patriotic pro-American kid who goes to the Olympics at 18, rips through everybody, and then very quickly, relatively speaking, becomes a world heavyweight champ. And then in short order becomes public enemy number one, and then an outright pariah and one of the most hated people in the country. And by the time the mid-70s got to where they were, he was still hated in some quarters, but the public opinion shifted. And as we know, when he passed, so unfortunately he wasn't that old, he was 74 when he passed, he was one of the most beloved popular culture figures and historical figures of the 20th century. And obviously into the 21st. He was just one of those people who had the magic. And For better or worse, the What's My Name fight against Ernie Terrell, February 6, 1967 at the Houston Astrodome, is part of a very complicated legacy of one of the most compelling historical figures who ever lived. And with that, we've reached the end of episode 80 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on, once again, a little bit of a trip down memory lane, a bit of a history lesson, which I hope has been entertaining and informative on this Tuesday night in New York. If you've watched episode 80 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. Don't forget to comment too. Or if you've checked out episode 80 on the audio platforms such as Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio, please click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 81 real soon. Peace.